Jackson Barrett had no idea that on a cold and blustery afternoon, one small act of kindness at the grocery store would change the course of his entire life. He thought he was just helping a stranger who couldn't cover her groceries, nothing more, unaware that beneath her humble appearance lay a world of wealth and influence that would soon unlock unbelievable possibilities for Barrett. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. Jackson was up before dawn nearly every day, raising himself from a sagging mattress that had once belonged to his father. The morning routine never varied. He would rub his eyes, struggle to chase the lingering fatigue from his limbs, and pull on old clothes that smelled faintly of earth. His first steps outside the modest farmhouse always felt like a fresh confrontation with uncertainty, because each day on Barrett Farms presented a new question of survival. Would he have enough money to keep the lights on, to feed his animals, or to buy the seeds he needed for the next planting season? His land sprawled over 100 acres that had once been lush and thriving during his grandfather's era, back when the Barrett name meant something in their rural community. Generations of Barretts had grown corn, soybeans, or vegetables in abundance, reaping decent harvests that allowed for modest comfort. But times changed, rainfall patterns shifted, the cost of agricultural supplies soared, and giant corporate farms began to dominate the marketplace. The farm Jackson inherited was worn down, with a battered tractor that sputtered and moaned every time he tried to start it, fences in need of repair, and a barn missing shingles. He had been doggedly fighting to keep it afloat since his father's passing 3 years prior, determined not to be the Barrett who let the family legacy fade away. He lived alone in that aging house, a wooden structure with floors that creaked in protest whenever he moved from one room to another. Sometimes he felt the emptiness gnaw at him, but there was no time for self-pity. The sun might still be asleep behind the horizon, but Jackson never had that luxury. The cows, chickens, and 2 goats, who roamed around a small section near the barn, needed tending. Their feed was his first priority, and if he kept them healthy, he could count on milk, eggs, and a bit of cheese production to sell at a local market. Every small source of income mattered, because the bank notices were piling up on his kitchen table, silent reminders that his finances were precariously close to collapse. This particular morning was brisk, the cold wind biting through the thin flannel jacket he wore. His best coat had suffered tears from a barbed wire mishap, leaving him with little insulation against the chill. He tried not to dwell on it, pushing forward to scoop feed for the chickens, while reminding himself that he still had time to turn things around. Perhaps this year's yield would be better, or maybe the local farmers market would start paying more for the produce. Thinking optimistically was sometimes all that kept him going. After his morning chores, Jackson decided he needed to restock certain basic supplies. A few personal groceries for himself, and feed that was running dangerously low. The local farm supply store was on the other side of town, attached to a grocery store where folks did their everyday shopping. He loaded up a small trailer, hitched it to his old truck, the one that sputtered and rattled far too often, and set out along the winding country road. The sky hung a dull gray, the kind of color that promised neither sun nor rain. The wind persisted, making the farmland appear stark and uninviting, bare trees rattling their branches like skeletal arms. As he drove, Jackson reflected on how drastically life had changed since his parents' passing. The farm's once sturdy finances had drained away. Crops suffered from either too much rain or not enough, and the few times he managed a decent harvest, the prices had been too low to cover costs. Still, he refused to abandon the land. It wasn't just pride, it was a sense of duty. This was the place he'd grown up in. The fields where he'd learned to ride a pony under his father's watchful eye. The orchard where he'd climbed apple trees as a child, scraping his knees yet feeling invincible. He told himself that if he just held on, a break might come. Maybe a favorable year of weather, or a new market for his produce, or some kind of miracle. When he reached the grocery and farm supply store, he parked at the far corner of the lot to keep his rusted truck and trailer out of the way. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air felt warmer than outside, carrying the faint smell of cinnamon from a holiday display. Jackson scanned the aisles for the feed area, eventually finding the sacks of chicken feed and cattle supplement he needed. He hefted them onto a cart, his muscles protesting the weight. Then he steered his cart toward the front registers. Somewhere near the produce section, he paused. He didn't need fresh fruits or vegetables. Ironically, he grew enough at home, but he did require some items that were easier to buy in small quantities than to produce himself. Flour, salt, sugar, a bit of cooking oil. While scanning the shelves for the cheapest brand, he thought about how every cent counted. He tried to ignore the envy that occasionally flared up, envy of those who breezed through the store loading their carts with brand-name products without a second thought. Money was tight enough that he rarely indulged in anything beyond basic staples. Eventually, he maneuvered into the line at one of the few open registers, behind a handful of other customers. He recognized a couple of them, neighbors who lived a few miles down the road. They nodded politely, but offered no conversation, aware that small talk could be awkward under the quiet tension of rural life. Jackson eyed the cart of feed, imagining the expense, mentally tallying how much he had left in his bank account. It would be tight, but he should manage for another couple of weeks until something, anything, improved. As the line shuffled forward, he noticed the woman ahead of him. She stood out, not because she seemed wealthy or flamboyant, but rather because she was bundled in clothing that didn't quite fit the freezing temperatures. She wore a thin sweater, the threads worn at the elbows, and she clutched a small purse that looked equally threadbare. Her hair was tied back, and there was a hint of fatigue in her posture, as though she'd had a long day, or many days of hardship. She placed a few items on the register conveyor: a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, some milk, and a couple of canned goods. Jackson guessed she was either living alone or on a tight budget, buying only what she needed to get by. The cashier scanned her items, then read the total. The woman opened her purse and rummaged for money, or perhaps a debit card, but from her facial expression, she quickly realized she was short. Jackson watched her face flush with embarrassment as she apologized to the cashier, stammering that she might need to put something back. The line behind them shifted uneasily, some customers exchanging glances of mild impatience. The woman looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. She began to pick out which items to sacrifice, hesitating over the bread or the eggs, apparently trying to decide which was more critical. Without hesitating, Jackson felt an impulse he rarely ignored. Even though he himself was financially stretched, he stepped forward, pulling a few bills from his pocket. "Don't worry," he said quietly, placing the money on the counter. "I got it. Keep your groceries." The woman spun to look at him, surprise etched on her features. "Sir, you don't have to." He waved her off, mustering a reassuring smile. "It's fine. I know how it can be. Just take your groceries. No need to fuss." Her eyes were wide, and for a moment, she appeared on the brink of tears, though she swallowed them back. She thanked him multiple times, voice trembling. "You're so kind. I appreciate it." She tried to offer him her small handful of change, but he refused. "You keep it," he insisted gently, noticing the cashier ring up her items and bag them. She took the bag, her face still marked by a mix of relief and gratitude, and she paused as though wanting to say something more. But ultimately, she only nodded again and left, clutching her meager groceries close. Jackson felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, overshadowed by the knowledge that he had just spent money he really couldn't spare. Yet, part of him told him it was right. He recalled a lesson from his father's old rule: always help those who need it, even if you're struggling yourself. You never know what someone else is going through. So with that principle in mind, he paid for his own purchases, which included the feed, and tried not to wince at the final total. The cashier, an older woman named Myra, who recognized Jackson, gave him a soft smile of admiration. "That was mighty sweet of you, Jackson," she said softly. That lady looked really down on her luck. He shrugged, feeling a touch self-conscious. "We all have tough times. She needed it more than I did." With that, he hauled his sacks of feed out to the truck, loaded them carefully onto the trailer, and drove home under the dull, cloudy sky. He never guessed that the quiet woman might appear again, and certainly not in a way that would change everything. The following days rolled by in their usual blur of farm chores, financial worries, and attempts to keep hope alive. Jackson labored from dawn to dusk, ensuring the animals were fed, the fences mended, and the fields prepared for the next planting. At night, he often fell asleep at the kitchen table, reading over old seed catalogs or scanning local ads for anything he could do to earn a bit more money. The memory of the woman at the grocery store occasionally passed through his mind, but he chalked it up to one more fleeting moment of human connection in a harsh world. A week later, a morning came that was so cold, the pond near the barn froze over. Jackson woke to the sound of the wind howling outside, a low moan that rattled the windows. He sighed, layering on clothes that were not quite enough to stave off the chill, and stepped into his boots. After checking on the livestock, he returned to the house and brewed a pot of coffee, letting the smell fill the air with some semblance of comfort. He almost didn't notice when an unfamiliar car turned onto his driveway, its engine purring with a sophistication that stood out against the battered trucks one usually saw in the area. Jackson peered out the window, brow furrowing. A sleek black sedan was parking by the front gate, the tires crushing the thin layer of ice that coated the ground. Out stepped a woman in a heavy coat, a scarf draped elegantly around her neck, and boots that looked more urban than rural. With her was a man in a suit, also stepping onto the driveway, glancing around as though verifying they had the correct address. Jackson's first thought was that perhaps this was a bank official or some corporate representative come to talk about land deals. A chill of dread slid along his spine, because he had been ignoring some phone calls from the bank, but not to the extent he expected a personal visit. Curious and cautious, Jackson opened the door, stepping out onto the creaking porch. The wind slapped his face with cold. "Can I help you folks?" he called, keeping his tone polite but reserved. The woman walked closer. Her face was partially shielded by the scarf and the coat's high collar, but he could see vibrant eyes and a confident posture. Something about her was oddly familiar. Then she lowered the scarf, offering him a warm smile. He realized with a start that this was the same woman he had helped at the grocery store, yet she looked drastically different now. Instead of a worn sweater, she wore a tailored coat that screamed quality, and her hair was perfectly styled, with a hint of subtle highlights. Even her expression was more self-assured. He blinked in confusion, attempting to reconcile the memory of a frail figure at the register with this poised figure standing at his gate. She took a few steps forward, the man in the suit hovering protectively behind her. "Hello," she said, her voice gentler than her commanding attire might suggest. "You may not remember me, but we met at the grocery store last week. You covered my bill when I came up short." She hesitated, as though unsure how he would react. "I realize this is a surprise. May I talk to you for a moment?" Jackson stared, his mind whirling. "Yes, I do remember. But you look different. Are you okay?" The question slipped out, his immediate concern being whether she was safe or scammed him in some way. The last time he saw her, she seemed so vulnerable. A flicker of embarrassment crossed her features. "That day, I wasn't exactly dressed for the conditions. It's a long story, but I'd appreciate the chance to explain. May we come inside? It's freezing out here." He nodded, though caution still thrummed in his chest. He gestured toward the door. "Sure, come in. Sorry it's a bit messy. Didn't expect visitors." He led them into the living room, where the old couch and mismatched chairs bore the scars of use. The woman and her companion removed their coats. Jackson caught the glimmer of a designer label on her coat, something he recognized only because he had glimpsed advertisements in magazines at the store. She was not just better off, she was in a different league altogether. She introduced herself as Vanessa. Her companion, a refined-looking man in his 50s, was introduced as Philip, her personal assistant. They perched on the worn couch, carefully avoiding a loose spring that threatened to poke through the fabric. Jackson remained standing, leaning against the kitchen doorway, arms folded. "So, Vanessa," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "You said you wanted to explain something? That day at the store, you looked well. You looked like you needed some help." Vanessa exhaled, her expression turning serious. "I did, but not in the way you imagine. Let me start by saying that I am truly grateful for what you did. You didn't hesitate, even though you were clearly not in the best financial position yourself. That compassion struck me deeply." She paused, looking briefly at Philip, as though to gather her thoughts. What you probably never guessed is that I'm the CEO of Maple Leaf Grocers, the very chain of grocery stores we were standing in. And I was doing a personal inspection in a sort of disguise, trying to understand how customers and staff experience our stores when they don't know who I am. I want to see if there are issues or problems that no one tells me about. That day, I left my wallet and phone behind, intentionally, to better experience what it's like to rely on minimal resources. Jackson blinked, his mind momentarily going blank. Maple Leaf Grocers was a massive chain, spanning multiple states, known for their extensive product selection and modern stores. He had never heard of Vanessa by name, but he knew the brand well. CEO? He echoed, baffled by the concept that the same woman who couldn't afford bread and milk was actually the head of one of the biggest grocery chains in the region. She nodded, offering a wry smile. Yes, CEO. That day, I wanted a genuine look at how our store functioned for someone with almost no money. I planned to buy just a few items, but the truth is, I was caught off guard by how humiliating it feels to not have enough at the register. My plan was to observe, not to actually fall short of money. But I drastically underestimated the cost of the items with current inflation. When I realized I didn't have enough, you stepped in and helped me. You had no idea who I was, and you didn't ask for anything in return. That simple act of generosity shook me. I've spent years building a business empire, yet in that moment, I was reminded of the basic decency that can come from everyday people. Jackson tried to process her words. He felt a swirl of astonishment, caution, and maybe a tinge of irritation that he'd been unwittingly pulled into some CEO's experiment. Yet looking at her face, he sensed genuine respect. He scratched the back of his neck. Well, guess I'm glad I could help. But why are you here now? Vanessa shared a swift look with Philip, who cleared his throat and produced a slim folder from his briefcase. Because I believe in reciprocating kindness, Vanessa said softly, leaning forward. I did some research, found out your name from the store clerk and the receipt you paid with. I discovered you're Jackson Barrett, owner of Barrett Farms. That farm, from what I hear, is in dire straits. The local bank has threatened foreclosure more than once. You also supply a small farmer's market with eggs and produce, but your revenue is hardly enough to keep afloat. Am I right? Hearing the reality of his struggles laid bare stunned Jackson's pride, but he forced himself to stay composed. Something like that, he murmured. Vanessa softened her gaze. I'm not here to pry into your personal situation. However, I have a proposition. Maple Leaf Grocers has been planning an initiative to partner directly with small farms for a special line of organic produce. I want to offer Barrett Farms a chance to become one of our flagship partners. You would supply certain crops to be sold under a new brand label in Maple Leaf stores, guaranteeing you a stable income. Moreover, I want to give you a lifetime supply of groceries from any Maple Leaf location as a personal thank you for your kindness. A stunned silence filled the room. Jackson's mouth went dry. A lifetime supply of groceries from one of the region's largest chains? That alone seemed surreal. Yet the farm partnership was even more momentous, because it meant the difference between foreclosure and revival. But you barely know me, he protested. Why would you choose my farm? Vanessa shrugged lightly, as if to convey that complex business deals could sometimes be overshadowed by simple gestures of humanity. I run a large corporation, yes, but I haven't forgotten the value of sincerity. The empathy you showed me, someone you thought was just down on their luck, proved your character. I want Maple Leaf's next project to reflect genuine collaboration with farmers who believe in the land, who have real integrity. If I'm going to commit major resources, I'd rather do it with someone who helped me personally. It might sound sentimental, but I believe in it. Jackson's mind whirled. The cynic in him wanted to suspect a trick or hidden angle, but the sincerity in her eyes was hard to dismiss. He also felt a flicker of hope that maybe, after years of scraping by, fortune had finally landed on his doorstep. He inhaled slowly, letting the swirl of emotions settle. That's a lot to process, he admitted, voice trembling with a mixture of awe and caution. What would it entail? I mean, the partnership. Philip, The assistant opened the folder and handed Jackson a neat sheaf of documents. "We have a preliminary outline. Essentially, Maple Leaf Grocers would invest in your farm's infrastructure, new irrigation systems, greenhouses, anything needed for year-round or expanded crop production. In return, you commit to using sustainable and organic methods, abiding by Maple Leaf standards. We sign a multi-year contract guaranteeing Maple Leaf first rights to a percentage of your produce at fair market prices. This would secure you a consistent revenue stream, and we'd handle distribution. The details can be negotiated, but that's the overview." Jackson shuffled through the papers, seeing clauses about operational support, brand collaboration, and a guaranteed minimum purchase from the farm. He also saw mention of advanced technology, drip irrigation, solar power, modern equipment. The mention of a lifetime grocery supply was just a brief statement near the front, as though it were a personal gift rather than a major business perk. He felt a wave of disbelief. "And you'd just do that for me? For my land?" he asked, voice almost lost in the big room. Vanessa nodded, then pinned him with a thoughtful look. "I can't guarantee it won't involve challenges. You'll have to scale up your production, adopt certain methods we prefer, and allow Maple Leaf inspectors to ensure quality. But from a business standpoint, it benefits us, too, because consumers love the story of direct farm partnerships. They want to know their food is grown by real people, not faceless corporations. And personally, it's my way of saying thank you for the compassion you offered. May, no questions asked." Silence drifted in the living room, broken only by the wind rattling the windows. Jackson exhaled, setting the documents on the small coffee table. He glanced around the house, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the worn furniture, the faint musty smell that spoke of decades of living without major renovations. Could all this change with a single partnership? He didn't want to appear too eager or gullible, but at the same time, what reason did he have to refuse? Pride? That wouldn't save his farm from foreclosure. "Let me read these carefully," he said. "I'm not used to big contracts. Might want someone to advise me. But I can't lie. I'm grateful. This is a lifeline." Vanessa smiled gently. "Of course. Take your time. I can have my legal team answer questions. I'll leave you with that folder. I'd like to return in a few days to see what you think. If you want to move forward, we can finalize the details." She stood, zipping her coat. "Thank you for letting us into your home. I know this is all quite sudden." Jackson walked them back outside, where the frigid air stunned his cheeks. "Thank you," he said again, voice low. "Not just for coming, but for not forgetting that day. For caring." Vanessa's eyes softened. "I won't forget. That day reminded me that real empathy still exists. I'll see you soon." She and Philip got into the car, the engine humming smoothly, and drove away, leaving Jackson standing by the gate, the folder clutched in his hands. The black sedan shrank into the horizon as a swirl of wind whipped across the farmland. He felt like he might wake up any second, discovering this was a dream. But the folder was tangible. The words inside it offered the promise he'd been praying for, yet never dared imagine. He spent the next days in a haze of cautious excitement. Between chores and errands, he pored over the contract, reading every clause multiple times. The complexities were daunting. References to supply chain logistics, brand marketing, quality control. But the gist was simple. If Barrett Farms became a Maple Leaf Grocers partner, he'd get the financial support to modernize, plus a stable market for his produce, plus the gift of free groceries for life. He debated calling his neighbor, Bill Henderson, who had once worked in real estate, to ask for advice. However, given the unique nature of this offer, Bill might not be much help. Ultimately, Jackson decided to trust his gut, combined with a bit of cautious negotiation. When Vanessa returned with Philip a few days later, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, making the farmland glimmer with a subdued hope. They sat around Jackson's modest kitchen table, the papers laid out among coffee cups and an old lamp that flickered. He asked a few key questions. Would Maple Leaf let him choose which crops to grow, or would they dictate everything? Could he keep selling a portion of his harvest at the local farmers market for personal connections? Would the improvements remain his property if the partnership ever ended? Vanessa answered patiently. Maple Leaf had certain preferences: lettuce, tomatoes, various vegetables popular with organic shoppers, but he could suggest additional products. He'd be free to sell a portion at local markets, as long as Maple Leaf's guaranteed quota was met first. If the partnership ended amicably, he would keep all improvements on the farm. She even offered to help refinance his bank loans, using Maple Leaf's credibility to secure better terms. Jackson felt his doubts easing. This was no trap, it seemed. It was a genuine collaboration. Thus, with trembling pen in hand, Jackson signed the preliminary agreement. The next steps involved scheduling an assessment of his farmland by Maple Leaf's agricultural team, drafting a formal multi-year contract, and finalizing the grocery supply arrangement. Vanessa, with a kind of quiet satisfaction, scribbled her own signature. Philip notarized the documents. The handshake that followed felt surreal. Jackson saw in Vanessa's eyes a mixture of relief and excitement, as though she too believed in the future they were forging together. He walked them out, the mid-morning sun throwing long shadows across the yard. This time, as the car pulled away, he allowed himself a cautious smile. Maybe, after all these years of struggle, fate had decided to show him mercy. The transition began almost immediately. Within a week, a team of agricultural consultants arrived on Jackson's property, riding in sleek pickup trucks emblazoned with Maple Leaf's logo. They introduced themselves as specialists in sustainable farming, irrigation, soil science, and greenhouse operations. Jackson found himself guiding them through each parcel of land, pointing out where he currently grew certain crops, which fields needed better drainage, and which areas had gone fallow due to lack of funds. The team listened attentively, taking notes, snapping photos, and occasionally asking him about his long-term goals. He felt both nervous and proud. They seemed genuinely impressed by the land's potential, despite its neglected state. One consultant named Rebecca, an affable woman in her 40s, spent a day collecting soil samples, explaining how Maple Leaf wanted to ensure the farmland met organic standards. She also identified ways to enrich the soil using natural composting methods, cover crops, and minimal tilling. Jackson admitted he had never fully switched to organic because of the initial costs and the risk. She smiled. With Maple Leaf's backing, you'll have the resources to do it properly, she assured him. We'll help with seeds, training, and marketing. You'll see that your yields may even improve once the soil is healthier. In the midst of these technical discussions, Jackson also dealt with the promise of free groceries. Vanessa had given him a special card that identified him as a lifetime supply recipient at Maple Leaf Grocers. It felt odd to hold a simple plastic card that could feed him forever. The first time he used it, at the same store where he'd met her, the cashier recognized the card with wide eyes and rung him up for a zero total. He was embarrassed, feeling almost like a freeloader, but the store manager had come over to congratulate him, explaining that corporate had already briefed them. So he left with a cart full of fresh produce, ironically produce he grew at home too, along with flour, sugar, coffee, and other supplies, all paid for by Maple Leaf. For the first time in ages, he didn't have to do mental gymnastics to ensure he could afford his groceries. He felt a mix of relief and gratitude, tempered by the knowledge that he needed to succeed in the bigger venture so as not to let Vanessa down. The days turned into weeks, and Maple Leaf's improvements on Barrett farms began in earnest. Bulldozers arrived to level certain patches that had become uneven or eroded. An irrigation crew laid down piping for a drip system that would conserve water and deliver it precisely where needed. Jackson marveled at their efficiency. Instead of lugging hoses around or relying on the unpredictable rains, he'd have a state-of-the-art method. Next, they brought in greenhouse components, large metal frames, and clear panels that formed a protective environment for year-round vegetable growth. He had dreamed of such infrastructure, but never thought it possible. The cost alone would have broken him. Vanessa visited occasionally, sometimes unannounced, stepping out of her sedan in jeans and sturdy boots instead of the corporate suits. She walked the property with Jackson, listening to his ideas, praising the progress. She asked about the orchard area in one corner of his land. A few apple trees still stood, though many had died. With some care, we could revive them, he told her. My grandparents used to harvest apples by the bushel. Best cider you ever tasted. She encouraged him to consider orchard expansion once the main fields were stable. Maple Leaf might introduce a new line of local juices, she mused. Imagine Barrett Farms apple cider hitting all our stores. He chuckled, a glow of pride touching his cheeks. Never saw that coming. But maybe. I'd like that. In moments like those, he realized the hope that had reignited in him. He poured extra effort into the farm, waking earlier, working later. The weariness of years fighting alone felt lighter, replaced by the vigor of having a real partner, a corporation that for once wasn't trying to devour him, but to lift him up. Local neighbors noticed the flurry of activity. A few dropped by to remark on the fancy trucks and the rows of new greenhouse frames. Some were wary, suspecting Jackson had sold out to a big company that might eventually swallow his land. Jackson explained that Maple Leaf offered a fair contract, not an ownership stake. He assured them he still owned the farm, and the improvements were covered by an agreement that let him keep them if Maple Leaf's demands were met. The neighbors looked skeptical but impressed. "Hope they treat you right," said old Mr. Sanderson, who had lost his own farm to a corporate buyout years ago. "Just keep your eyes open, Jackson." He nodded. "I will," he promised. He understood their caution, but deep down, he believed in Vanessa's integrity. Her entire approach had been built on mutual benefit, not exploitation. He had not forgotten that she was the same woman who had stood humbly in the grocery store line, caught short on money. That vulnerability had been genuine, even if it was part of an undercover CEO experiment. He saw no trace of arrogance in her. So he pressed on, forging ahead with the improvements that each day made the farm more vibrant. A highlight arrived in mid-spring, when the greenhouse was officially ready for planting. Maple Leaf delivered pallets of organic seedlings, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, herbs, all labeled by variety. Jackson and the Maple Leaf agronomists carefully planted row after row inside the greenhouse, hooking each section up to the drip system. The agronomists taught him about proper spacing, pollination, and how to regulate temperature using vents and shading cloth. "This is like a new world," Jackson marveled, pressing a palm to the humid greenhouse air. "No more fighting the weather outside." Rebecca, one of the agronomists, grinned. "Exactly. You'll extend your growing season, produce more consistently, and hopefully see better returns. Maple Leaf is eager to put your produce on their shelves. Once consumers read about Barrett Farms, a local partnership, they'll flock to it, especially since you come from a real legacy farm." He swallowed, a wave of gratitude flooding him. "I hope I can meet everyone's expectations." She patted his shoulder. "You will. Just trust the process. Ask us if you need help. We're a team now." Meanwhile, the orchard saw new saplings arrive to replace the dead or dying apple trees. Maple Leaf financed the cost, shipping them from a reputable nursery. The orchard area was carefully mapped out, each row spaced for maximum sunlight. Jackson's heart swelled at the sight of the tender young trees that might someday yield bushels of crisp fruit. He felt a deeper connection to his grandparents, imagining them smiling from wherever they rested, proud that the orchard they once nurtured was being reborn. Every so often, Jackson would recall the initial impetus for all this. That day he gave a few dollars to cover a stranger's groceries and offered her his coat against the winter chill. He marveled at how a single gesture could trigger such profound change. Had he turned his back or mumbled an excuse about not having enough money, none of this would be happening. He tried to wrap his mind around the improbable chain of events. The memory humbled him, reminding him that compassion, even when he was near rock bottom, carried a power that defied logic. Vanessa, for her part, continued to come around, sometimes bringing additional Maple Leaf staff to coordinate marketing materials. A small photography team staged pictures of Jackson in the greenhouse, smiling with a basket of fresh produce. They snapped images of the orchard, the fields, and even the old farmhouse, in all its rustic charm. Vanessa explained that these photos would grace store displays and social media, telling the story of how Maple Leaf was supporting local farmers. "Our customers care about authenticity," she said. "They want to see the face behind the food." Jackson felt a bit awkward posing for pictures, but he mustered his best grin, hoping the sincerity of his efforts shone through. He also realized that if the marketing boosted his sales, it was worth the mild embarrassment. The freebies from Maple Leaf were not limited to groceries. They also offered to pay for a basic renovation of Jackson's farmhouse, at least to ensure it was structurally sound. He balked, feeling it might be too much like charity, but Vanessa assured him that a stable, presentable homestead would reflect better on the partnership. "You can't host visitors or buyers in a house about to collapse," she teased lightly. "Besides, you deserve decent living conditions. Let Maple Leaf help with that. It's in everyone's interest." Ultimately, he agreed to some modest updates: new roofing, repaired floors, fresh paint. As each improvement was made, the farmhouse took on a renewed spirit. It was no longer a dusty relic, but a place that felt like a real home. A place brimming with possibilities. Word spread among local farmers that Jackson had somehow snagged a golden deal with Maple Leaf. Some were envious, others curious how they might replicate it. A few approached Jackson, asking if he could put in a good word for them. He tried not to appear superior, reminding them that his luck hinged on a chance encounter. Vanessa's corporate office started receiving inquiries from other small farms, and while the company explored potential expansions, the pilot program remained primarily focused on Barrett farms. Jackson felt both humbled and proud, hoping that if he succeeded, maybe Maple Leaf would branch out and support more local agriculture. That could revitalize the region, turning what had once been a farmland in decline into a thriving community of small producers. As the greenhouse plants grew, their glossy leaves forming a thick canopy of green, Jackson's confidence blossomed. He learned new techniques for pruning tomato vines, controlling pests without chemicals, balancing nutrients in the soil. He kept meticulous records, a skill he had never fully mastered before. Each day, he emailed updates to Maple Leaf's agronomists, who guided him, praising his progress. All the while, the orchard saplings took root, forming neat rows of promise. The local bank, hearing rumors of Maple Leaf's investment, drastically softened its stance on foreclosure, even hinting that they might renegotiate his loans under better terms. The manager who once scowled at Jackson's meager finances now wore a polite smile, as though hoping to keep the farmer's business for the future. Jackson found it ironic how quickly attitudes changed when corporate backing arrived. Then, at last, the greenhouse produced its first sizable harvest, a combination of tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, and herbs. Rebecca and a few Maple Leaf staff came out to help him pick and pack the produce, teaching him to handle them gently so they arrived at stores unbruised. They loaded crates onto a Maple Leaf truck, which drove away mid-afternoon, bound for a nearby distribution center. The next morning, Jackson woke with a flutter of excitement, realizing that for the first time, produce from Barrett farms would be displayed in Maple Leaf stores across the region. That notion felt surreal. He tried to keep his hopes measured, reminding himself that it was a small batch. But deep down, he believed this was the start of something great. Sure enough, a day later, Vanessa called him personally. "Jackson, the produce arrived in perfect condition. Our store managers are thrilled. They say the vegetables look fresh and vibrant, better than many of the commercial suppliers. The signage is up, telling your story. It's a small pilot display right now, but if it sells as well as we expect, we'll expand to more stores. Congratulations." He exhaled a shaky breath. "That's wonderful. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'll keep up the quality, promise." She laughed lightly. "I never doubted it. By the way, I want you to join me at one of our key stores this weekend. We're doing a small promotional event. Would you be comfortable speaking to customers for a few minutes about your farm?" He hesitated. Speaking in public was daunting, especially about his personal struggles. Yet he recognized the marketing value. "I can try," he said. "I'm not the best speaker, but if it helps, sure." Vanessa sounded genuinely pleased. "Great. I'll have my team send you details. It'll be an informal setup. Just talk about how you grow things, what the farm means to you. People love hearing a genuine story." She paused. "Also, I want to add a mention of how we met, if that's okay with you. You covering my groceries, it's the heart of the narrative. That a struggling farmer helped someone in need, not knowing she was a billionaire CEO. It's like a fable about kindness paying off. Jackson's cheeks warmed. He still felt awkward about that incident, not wanting to appear like he'd done it for recognition. But he understood it had become the impetus for everything. "All right," he said softly. "If you think it helps, I won't hide it. That day changed both our lives," Vanessa replied. "Why not share it? Anyway, I'll let you go. Congratulations again." When the weekend rolled around, Jackson drove to the designated Maple Leaf store. He wore a neat button-down shirt, new jeans, and a pair of boots that were scuffed but polished enough to look presentable. The store manager greeted him warmly, leading him to a small stage near the produce section, where a cluster of customers and staff had gathered. A banner overhead read, "Local Spotlight, Barrett Farms." A large photo of Jackson leaning on a pitchfork in front of his greenhouse was displayed, along with a short description of his farm and a nod to Maple Leaf's partnership. Vanessa arrived shortly after, wearing a professional yet approachable outfit, greeting staff and customers with a confident smile. When it was time, she introduced Jackson to the crowd, telling them how he was a local farmer Maple Leaf was proud to support. She also alluded to the personal story that brought them together, how Jackson had covered her grocery bill when she couldn't pay, demonstrating empathy and generosity. The crowd, a mix of curious shoppers and loyal Maple Leaf customers, murmured in appreciation. Jackson stepped up to the microphone, heart pounding in his chest. He took a moment to gather his thoughts. "I'm Jackson Barrett," he began, voice a bit shaky, "and I own Barrett Farms. Just a couple hours from here. For years I struggled to keep the farm afloat. It's been in my family for generations, and letting it go was never an option in my mind. But times got hard. Then, one day, I met someone in need at a grocery store. I paid for her groceries, not because I had money to spare, but because I understood how it feels to be short on cash. It turns out, she was Ms. Vanessa here, Maple Leaf's CEO. He paused, glancing her way with a small smile. She offered me a chance that changed my life. Now, with her company's support, Barrett Farms is thriving. We're focusing on organic produce that's on these shelves right now. He gestured to the neatly arranged display of tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, labeled Barrett Farms. The audience clapped softly, some snapping pictures with their phones. Encouraged, Jackson continued, "I hope folks remember that, behind the food we buy, there are real people, real struggles. And sometimes, a single act of kindness can ripple out in ways you'd never expect. I just want to say thank you to Maple Leaf for believing in me, to Ms. Vanessa for keeping her word, and to everyone who tries these products. It's still unbelievable to me that these same vegetables I planted by hand are now in these stores. Thank you all." The applause grew, a genuine warmth flooding the produce section. Vanessa took the mic, praising Jackson's work ethic, announcing that Maple Leaf intended to expand the Barrett Farms line to more locations soon. Reporters from local news outlets hovered, scribbling notes, snapping photos of Jackson standing side by side with Vanessa in front of the vibrant produce display. She had turned his life story into a testament to Maple Leaf's corporate values. For the first time in ages, Jackson felt unashamed, even proud, to stand in the limelight. He hoped his father, wherever he was, could see that the farm's name was no longer associated with failure, but with a new dawn of opportunity. After the event, Jackson lingered in the store's back office, while staff dismantled the small stage. Vanessa joined him, sipping a bottle of water. "You did great," she told him. "People love hearing from a real farmer. Your sincerity shows." He shrugged, relieved the nerves were behind him. "Glad it was okay. I never did anything like that before." She gave a friendly laugh. "You're a natural. Listen, there's something else I want to discuss. We've had an overwhelming response from customers. They want more direct farm partnerships. I'd like to propose that we highlight you in a national marketing campaign. It'll require traveling to a few major cities, maybe doing interviews, talking about the story behind your produce and Maple Leaf's commitment to local farms. It's a big leap. Would you be willing?" Jackson's eyes widened. "National? I mean, that's huge. I'm just a regular guy. I don't know if I'm cut out for media tours." Vanessa nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But it could boost your sales even further, and it might open the door for us to collaborate with other farms in your area. If you're uncomfortable, we can keep it local, but I wanted to offer." "Why?" He swallowed, reflecting on how far he'd come from that day. He gave a few dollars to a woman in line. "I won't say no. I owe it to the farm to be open to new opportunities. But let's not go overboard. I still have a farm to run after all." She smiled. "Of course. We'll work around your schedule. For now, let's just see how the local expansions go. If the demand grows, we'll revisit the idea." Before leaving, she handed him a small sealed envelope. "A personal note," she explained, "and an invitation. Maple Leaf is hosting a formal dinner for our top executives and partners next month in the city. I'd be honored if you came as our guest. Wear something nice. Bring a friend if you like. Enjoy an evening of networking. We'll be celebrating the success of new collaborations. Your presence would mean a lot." Jackson stared at the envelope. Formal dinners and city galas were foreign worlds to him, but he felt a flicker of excitement. "I'll think about it," he promised. "I appreciate the invite." He drove home that evening with a sense of wonder. The day's events replayed in his mind: the applause, the photos, the manager's handshake, the customers thanking him for telling his story. As he passed through farmland en route to his own property, the fading sunlight cast the fields in a golden glow, the horizon a tapestry of oranges and purples. He parked by his barn, stepping out to listen to the quiet rustle of crops in the gentle breeze. He realized that Maple Leaf's assistance had turned a once depressing scene into one of promise. The greenhouse glowed softly with interior lights, nurturing the next wave of produce, while the orchard saplings stood upright, leaves shimmering in the dusk. He felt a rush of gratitude so strong it brought tears to his eyes. If only his father could see the farm now, no longer crumbling under debt, but blossoming under the care of someone who once wore a thin sweater at a register, counting coins. Over the subsequent weeks, the orchard bloomed, delicate blossoms dotting the young branches. The greenhouse's yield expanded, shipping out crates of produce regularly, each shipment accompanied by Maple Leaf's marketing push. Jackson received his first check from Maple Leaf, a sum greater than any he had earned in a single month for years, enough to cover all his expenses and have money left over to invest in more equipment. He paid off a chunk of his overdue bank loan. The manager, now fully aware of Maple Leaf's patronage, practically groveled for Jackson's business. Jackson didn't revel in the manager's changed attitude, but it offered a sweet sense of vindication. Meanwhile, the lifetime grocery benefit eased his household budget significantly, letting him experiment with new recipes and indulge in better quality goods. He sometimes used the card to pick up groceries for neighbors who were struggling, paying forward the kindness. Word of his generosity spread quietly, further cementing his reputation as not just a successful farmer, but a kind-hearted one. Maple Leaf's story about the day he gave a stranger enough money to cover her items had circulated widely, inspiring many. Some reporters wrote about it, calling it an example of how compassion could reshape entire communities. Jackson tried not to let the attention go to his head, staying humble in his daily tasks. After all, a greenhouse needed constant tending, orchard saplings needed pruning, and the rest of the farmland required weeding, fertilizing, and a watchful eye. Vanessa stayed in touch, occasionally dropping by with new ideas or updated expansions. She was planning a line of local fruit juices, to be made from orchard produce once the trees matured. She was also exploring a potential farm visit program, where loyal Maple Leaf customers could tour Barrett farms, see the greenhouse, and meet Jackson in person. He found the concept amusing, city folks paying to see his daily chores, but if it promoted local agriculture, he wasn't opposed. The bigger question was how to accommodate visitors without interfering with the real work. Vanessa promised to help with logistical solutions if he was open to it. One evening, as he was wrapping up chores, Jackson recalled the invitation to the formal dinner. He fished out the envelope Vanessa had given him, reading the details. The event was scheduled for the following week at a prestigious hotel in the city, a gathering of top Maple Leaf executives, select business partners, and some local officials. A dinner, followed by speeches, possibly dancing, all black tie. The notion made him cringe a bit. He wasn't exactly the tuxedo type, but if it was important to Vanessa and the Maple Leaf brand, he'd try to show up. He had no illusions about blending in gracefully, but he could at least wear a decent suit. Thus, the next day, Jackson drove to a neighboring town with a small suit shop. He told the tailor he needed something formal but not too flashy, explaining the event vaguely. The tailor measured him, made suggestions, and eventually convinced him to buy a dark navy suit that flattered his lean build, plus a tie and a crisp light shirt. It cost more than he would have spent a year ago, but Maple Leaf's partnership had put him in a position to afford it. He swallowed the pang of guilt. This was an investment in representing the farm. He told himself that. The tailor promised to have it altered in time for the dinner. Jackson left the shop feeling a tinge of excitement and a little bit of nerves. The night of the dinner arrived faster than expected. Jackson drove into the city, marveling at the tall buildings and endless traffic. He pulled up to the Grand Hotel, feeling intimidated by the valet parking and the stream of expensive cars rolling in. He wore his new suit, shoes polished to a shine, and had done his best to comb his hair in a neat style. As he stepped out, handing his old truck's keys to a valet, he saw the man's eyebrows shoot up at the difference between the other fancy cars and Jackson's well-worn pickup. But the valet said nothing, merely grinning politely. Inside, the lobby sparkled with chandeliers, polished marble floors, and a gentle hum of chatter from well-dressed guests. Jackson wove his way to the ballroom, trying not to stare too openly at the ornate decorations or the glitzy attire. He was greeted by a Maple Leaf official who recognized him from the marketing photos. "Mr. Barrett, welcome," she said graciously, handing him a name badge. He pinned it on, feeling self-conscious, then stepped into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linens, each set with fine china and gleaming silverware. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided around with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly near one corner. The guests were an array of corporate suits, local dignitaries, brand partners, and a few farmers who had also joined Maple Leaf's small-scale pilot expansions. Jackson spotted a couple of them and nodded in greeting, relieved not to be the only one feeling out of place. Vanessa approached, radiant in a sleek evening gown that combined elegance with a subtle edge. She beamed when she saw him, crossing the room to greet him with genuine warmth. "Jackson, you made it," she said. "You look wonderful. I'm so glad you could come." He smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude that she treated him as an equal. "Well, I appreciate the invite, though I'll admit I'm out of my element here." She laughed softly. "So am I, sometimes. Corporate events can be stiff, but it's important for forging connections. Come on, let me introduce you to a few people." She guided him around, introducing him to Maple Leaf board members, department heads, and even a couple of local politicians. Jackson tried to keep track of their names, all the while shaking hands and receiving polite remarks about how they loved the story of his farm. A few teased him about the next time they'd see him in a grocery ad. He smiled, mindful to keep conversation short, feeling a bit overwhelmed. Eventually, dinner was served, a lavish spread of gourmet dishes made from Maple Leaf's best produce and meats. Jackson tasted flavors he had never experienced, each course more artful than the last. He recognized some produce from the greenhouse, ironically turned into dishes he wouldn't have known how to pronounce a year ago. Despite the fancy ambiance, he felt a small swell of pride, thinking that maybe those peppers or tomatoes had once grown under his watchful eye. After the meal, Vanessa took the stage to give a speech, recapping Maple Leaf's achievements in sustainability, philanthropic ventures, and local partnerships. She highlighted the pilot farm program, naming Barrett Farms as the shining example of success. Then, with a gracious wave, she invited Jackson up, urging him to say a few words if he felt comfortable. He stood awkwardly behind the podium, the microphone making him feel too tall. He cleared his throat, scanning the sea of expectant faces. "Good evening," he began, voice echoing softly in the microphone. "I'm Jackson Barrett, from Barrett Farms. I guess you all know that now. It's an honor to be here, I never thought I'd stand in a place like this. In a room this fancy. Wearing a suit no less. A year ago, I was just a man on the brink, trying to keep my family's land from slipping away. Then fate stepped in the form of Ms. Vanessa. Though I didn't know her name or her status at the time, I just knew she needed help, and I had enough in my pocket to cover her groceries, even though money was tight for me. That acta. He paused, inhaling slowly. That act changed everything. She turned around and offered me a partnership that saved my farm. She gave me faith that big companies can still care about small folks. That day taught me you never know who you're helping. So, help anyway. Because sometimes, that kindness you share might come back around in ways you'd never imagine. So, to Maple Leaf, to Vanessa, to everyone who's believed in me, I say, thank you. My farm is strong again, my father's legacy lives on, and I'm proud to stand here tonight representing a new chapter for Barrett Farms. That's all. Thank you. A wave of applause rose, building in volume. Jackson felt a flush on his cheeks, relieved the speech was done. Vanessa offered him a handshake and a bright grin, then gave him a supportive pat on the back. As he stepped off the stage, multiple guests approached, praising him, asking more about the farm. The rest of the evening passed in a flurry of introductions, exchanging business cards, and collecting promises from executives who said they'd love to visit the orchard or greenhouse. When the event ended, Jackson felt drained but strangely exhilarated. He took a quiet moment in the corner, sipping water, reflecting on the surreality of it all. Vanessa found him there, leaning against a decorative pillar. "You did beautifully," she said. The crowd was moved. He nodded. "Feels surreal. Sometimes I wonder if this is real life or a dream." She shook her head, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's real, and you earned every bit of it, Jackson. Your generosity sparked everything, yes, but your hard work and resilience keep it going. Maple Leaf is just the framework. You're the heartbeat." Her words touched him deeply. He cleared his throat, struggling to keep emotion at bay. "Thank you for reminding me. I guess I'll keep forging on, do my best to live up to the trust you placed in me." She squeezed his arm affectionately. "That's all I can ask. Now, go get some rest. I'll have my driver arrange a hotel for you if you'd like to stay in town overnight." He offered a polite smile. "Thanks, but I think I'll head back. My animals need me in the morning." She laughed softly. "Of course. The farm never sleeps." They exchanged a final handshake. Before letting go, she pressed a small envelope into his hand. "Your first official check from the orchard expansions. I hope it helps you keep building. Good night, Jackson." He thanked her, feeling the weight of that envelope, suspecting it contained a sum that might cover further improvements or a chunk of the orchard replanting. He walked out to retrieve his truck from the valet. The night air had cooled, the city lights glittering against the sky. A pang of longing for the wide, starry expanse at Barrett Farms touched his heart. This city was impressive, but it wasn't home. As the valet brought his truck around, Jackson climbed in, feeling the hush of the engine that was nowhere near as refined as the sedans lined up around him. But it was his, part of the rural tapestry he loved. He drove away from the bright hotel, navigating through city streets until they gave way to quieter roads, then to highways, then to the open farmland. By the time he reached his driveway, the moon was high, bathing the greenhouse in silver light. He parked, stepped out, and breathed in the familiar scent of tilled earth. This was the life he had fought for, that Maple Leaf had helped preserve. He felt grateful, content, and more determined than ever to honor the gift he'd been given. The orchard blossomed further as the weeks turned into months. The greenhouse churned out a steady stream of vegetables, which Maple Leaf distributed to an increasing number of stores. Jackson's brand became something of a local legend, the story behind it continuing to resonate with customers. He gradually hired a few farmhands, neighbors who needed work, sharing the spoils of his success. He repainted the barn, expanded the chicken coop, and even built a small stable for a pair of horses he acquired. Life on the farm was no longer about survival alone. It was about building a future that honored the Barrett heritage while pushing forward into new possibilities. Every so often, Jackson would catch a segment on the local news or on Maple Leaf's social media channels, featuring him or the farmland. He learned to talk to cameras with a measure of calm, explaining how each row of tomato plants was nurtured, how the orchard saplings were carefully pruned. He insisted they highlight the farmhands too, or the ancient irrigation channels that had once served his father's fields. Maple Leaf's marketing team embraced the authenticity, weaving it into a narrative that drew in families who wanted to support local produce. Sales soared, to the point that the bank eventually offered Jackson a fully restructured mortgage with favorable terms, ensuring the farm was secure for the foreseeable future. None of it changed the essence of who Jackson was. He still rose with the sun, still wore old boots caked in mud, still ended his days with a bone-tired satisfaction. The difference now was that he faced each dawn with hope, not dread. He had the means to keep the land healthy, to pay his farmhands a fair wage, to experiment with new crops, and to plan for expansions. He even considered adding a small bed and breakfast concept near the orchard, so visitors could stay on the farm, watch the sunrise over the fields. Maple Leaf supported the idea, seeing it as another angle for the brand partnership. The notion that city folks might pay for the chance to gather eggs at dawn or pick tomatoes straight from the vine seems surreal, but if they wanted a slice of real farm life, why not? Meanwhile, the memory of how it all began remained a guiding star. Sometimes, Jackson would be in a store or out in public and notice someone struggling to pay for groceries or short on bus fare. He never hesitated to reach into his pocket, quietly covering their cost, refusing any attempt at repayment. It was a habit that, for him, captured the entire moral of his story. You don't wait to see if someone can reward you. You just help, because you never know who stands before you or what seeds that kindness will plant. Vanessa visited less frequently as the operation stabilized, trusting Jackson to manage day-to-day tasks. But they stayed in touch, exchanging emails, occasional phone calls. She confided that Maple Leaf was exploring a similar farm partnership in another state, and she'd sometimes ask for his insights or personal tips on building trust with small farmers. He, in turn, sought her advice on business decisions, such as whether to invest in a cold storage unit or if he should attempt to raise goats for specialty cheese. Their relationship evolved into a comfortable friendship, though each was busy in their own sphere. When they did meet, they often reminisced about that day in the checkout line, marveling at how quickly a single gesture had branched out into a better world for both of them. As the orchard approached its first real harvest of apples, Jackson marveled at the fruit-laden branches, the clusters of green and red forming. He walked the rows at dusk, remembering stories of his grandfather shaking the apple trees during family gatherings, children squealing and scrambling to collect the fallen fruit. Now, these saplings, financed by Maple Leaf, were producing a bounty that might one day surpass what the old orchard had done. He paused by one tree, running a calloused hand over its bark. "You grew strong," he murmured, anthropomorphizing the tree as though it were a dear friend. "We both did." Then, he smiled, gazing at the horizon where the last traces of sun glowed, confident in the knowledge that tomorrow held more promise than any day of the past had. By the time a year had passed since the day he gave a few dollars to a freezing stranger, Barrett Farms was officially recognized as a signature Maple Leaf partner, featured in stores across multiple states. Jackson found himself traveling occasionally to speak at corporate events or agricultural conventions, always feeling a jolt of nerves when stepping into big city auditoriums. But each time he told his story, he watched faces light up. People wanted to believe that kindness was still recognized in the world, that small gestures could yield big transformations. He had become the living testament to that belief. At the farm, new expansions sprouted. Maple Leaf financed a second greenhouse, this one specializing in strawberries and leafy greens. Jackson's orchard began producing enough apples for initial test batches of cider, which Maple Leaf's R&D department turned into a product called Barrett's Best Apple Cider, eventually sold in select Axley stores. The brand soared in popularity, quickly outselling the predictions. Jackson took the success with humility, ensuring a portion of his profits went to maintain the orchard, pay employees well, and sponsor small charities in the community. He never forgot the days when he couldn't afford basic groceries. Now that he had more than enough, he believed in sharing. On the anniversary of that fateful grocery store moment, Vanessa visited the farm for a relaxed gathering. Jackson prepared a simple lunch: a hearty soup, bread from a local bakery, fresh salad from the greenhouse, and a small apple pie from the orchard's produce. They ate in the farmhouse's updated kitchen, the windows open to let in the mild breeze. Over lunch, they reflected on how everything had unfolded. Has it really only been a year? Vanessa mused, sipping a mug of cider. Feels like a lifetime of changes. Jackson nodded. Yes, so much has happened. I still can't believe it sometimes. I'm glad you stepped into that store that day. Or should I say, I'm glad I was behind you in line. He chuckled quietly. It's taught me that there's always hope, even when you can't see it. Vanessa pressed a hand to her chest. Your kindness taught me humility too. For all my resources and success, I had forgotten the raw vulnerability of not having enough. That day, I felt it firsthand, and your generosity was a wake-up call. I want Maple Leaf to keep bridging the gap between corporations and real communities. This partnership is only the beginning. He smiled, heart full. Count me in, wherever it goes. Because, if we can do this at Barrett Farms, maybe there's 1,000 other small farms that can follow the same path. Turn a struggling place into a success story. She nodded, eyes bright with possibility. Exactly. One farm, one community at a time. That's how real change happens. So let's keep forging forward, Jackson. They clinked their mugs of cider in a casual toast, letting the sweetness of the moment linger. Outside, the orchard shimmered in the midday sun, leaves rustling as though applauding their intentions. The greenhouse stood as a testament to transformation, the fields stretching beyond, waiting for the next planting. The farmland, once on the brink of desolation, now teemed with life and promise. Late that afternoon, after Vanessa departed, Jackson wandered his property, grateful for the stillness that wrapped around him. He paused by the fence line, gazing across the fields to where the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in a tapestry of oranges and pinks. His mind drifted to the memory of seeing that woman in the grocery line, rummaging in her worn purse. He had stepped forward, almost reflexively, offering enough money to cover her shortfall. He had also draped his coat over her shoulders that day, noticing how she trembled under the store's weak heating system. She had tried to protest, but he insisted, saying, "You look like you need it more than me right now." He recalled the relief in her eyes, the quiet thanks she had whispered. He inhaled, the cool evening air filling his lungs, tinted with the scent of alfalfa and earth. That small gesture, done in a moment of compassion, had unfurled into a tapestry of opportunities beyond anything he had ever dreamed. If someone told him a year ago that his farm would be financially stable, expanding, and recognized across multiple states, he would have laughed it off as impossible. Yet here he stood, living proof of how a single spark of generosity could ignite a wildfire of positive change. A gentle breeze brushed against him, and he closed his eyes, letting a wave of gratitude wash through his weary muscles. Life still demanded effort, and the farm would always be a source of sweat and toil. But now it was also a source of joy, of growth, of communal benefit. He pictured his father's face, proud, nodding that the Barrett name continued. Then, opening his eyes, he ambled back toward the farmhouse, stepping inside just as the last rays of sunlight kissed the fields. He flicked on a lamp, set a kettle to boil for tea, and once again scanned the improvements that had brought the place to life. He felt a contentment rarely known in his earlier years of hardship. He decided to settle at the kitchen table for a moment, penning a brief note in a small journal he'd kept since the partnership began. He wrote about each new step: the orchard blossoming, the greenhouse thriving, the marketing events, the expansions, the updated house. Then he wrote a single line about that day, the grocery store memory. He wrote, "I offered what little I had to a stranger, not knowing she was a billionaire. Sometimes you help because it's right, not because you expect a reward. That might be the truest form of giving." He set the pen down, rereading the line, letting it resonate. The tea kettle whistled softly on the stove, and he smiled to himself. Yes, That was it. The truth that had set everything in motion. He rose, poured the tea, and stepped out to the porch, sipping slowly as dusk settled. The horizon faded from gold to indigo, and stars pricked the dark sky. The farm breathed gently beneath him, the animals rustling in their pens, the orchard's branches swaying in the evening breeze. He stood there for a long time, letting the quiet fill him, cradling in his mind the improbable journey from scarcity to abundance, from hopelessness to renewal. From a simple act of kindness to a partnership that transformed more lives than he could count. The name Barrett Farms now meant not just a piece of land, but a testament to what faith and empathy could achieve. In the distance, a train horn sounded, traveling across the flat farmland, a lonely echo in the night. Jackson took one more sip of tea, then set the mug aside. He felt the chill intensify, reminding him that the nights remained cold. He drew his heavier coat around him, ironically, not the same one he had given away, but a newer one courtesy of Maple Leaf's generosity. That old coat was probably folded in a closet somewhere, a relic of the day everything changed. He hadn't needed to wear it, but he sometimes looked at it, recalling the spark it had ignited. Because in the end, a farm, a future, and an entire chain of blessings could begin with something as unremarkable as covering someone's groceries and loaning them a coat. That was the wonder of kindness, the miracle he'd live by for the rest of his days.